The New Orleans Saints are coming off of two devastating losses, and if they want to keep the season from slipping away from their grasp, they're going to have to take advantage of these three things. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to be taking a look at three things the New Orleans Saints need to take advantage of if they want to change the narrative around their season after two pretty devastating losses. We're going to take a look at why the offense needs another playmaker to step up, where the Saints could find that production on and off the roster. We'll take a look at why quarterback play has not been the issue, but the Saints have to take advantage of the good quarterback play that they are getting. And we're going to lead everything off here with the fact that the Saints simply need to figure out how to close out late leads. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day and for being an everydayer here on the show. But it's a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Well, look, the New Orleans Saints are coming off of two really tough losses. First to the Philadelphia Eagles, then yesterday to the Atlanta Falcons. And now is the time for the New Orleans Saints to begin to change the narrative about their team. There are going to be very small, very little expectations around the New Orleans Saints on Monday night going up against the Kansas City Chiefs. The Saints lose that game, the needle doesn't move. The Saints win that game, the needle moves drastically. But even beyond that game, the Saints still have a big issue to figure out, or big thing that they need to figure out, something they need to start taking advantage of, and it's getting late leads and maintaining them to win close games. This has been a big issue for New Orleans for the past couple of years. I want to give a quick shout out to, it was Fletcher Mackel, but then it was also our good friend Jeff Asher, Crime Analytics on Twitter, who broke down the fact the Saints, under Dennis Allen, are 0-4 so far in the last couple of years since he's been the head coach, when the opposing team gets the ball within 2.5 to 1 minute left while the New Orleans Saints hold a one-score lead. They're 0-4 in those situations. Basically, to boil it down, the Saints have found ways in the recent past to be able to take a late lead, but over on the offensive side, but then surprisingly, the bread and butter of this team, the side of the ball that's supposed to be the strongest side of the ball, the New Orleans Saints defense has had trouble maintaining that close lead late, with two losses of such category in the last 2 weeks. Once against the Philadelphia Eagles, where the Saints took the lead with just over a minute left, and then this game up against the Atlanta Falcons, where they took the lead with exactly a minute left, with the Atlanta Falcons getting the ball with 58 seconds remaining in the game. The Saints have had trouble closing out those matchups over on the defensive side of the football, despite the fact that the offense did what it needed to do. The offense could have done more. The defense could have done more earlier. The special teams units could have done more or less, depending upon how you look at it earlier. All of that is also true. But given the circumstances that the Saints have faced over the course of the last couple of weeks, the offense in both of those games, a touchdown pass from Derek Carr to Chris Olave, and then a rushing touchdown by Alvin Kamara, have come back and taken the lead late, and then the defense has not been able to close the game out. Last week, 3 defenders run into one another, and Dallas Goedert, Philadelphia Eagles tight end, catches and runs for 61 yards, opening up the door for a quick score and touchdown by Saquon Barkley. Now, in that game, the offense did get the ball back, but an interception is what ended up sealing the deal. But still, nonetheless, defense not being able to make the stop there is the study that we're looking at. It's not a point the finger. It's not a blame game thing. It's just that's the angle of the study that we're looking at in this situation and that we're exploring. I'll get to the other side of closing out games late, which is being able to do something when you have the ball. But then over with the Atlanta Falcons, the Saints running the clock down, getting the touchdown the rushing touchdown by Alvin Kamara. And then instead of it being the defense giving up a big play or giving up a big yardage, it's one penalty. One penalty. Now, it's a big penalty, a 30-yard penalty on a defensive pass interference called on Paul Adebo, who was flagged for defensive pass interference 3 times in this game. He was also targeted 13 times in this matchup. So it felt very much like Falcons quarterback Kirk Cousins and Falcons offensive coordinator Zach Robinson just kind of knew how it is that Paulson Adebo is officiated and the reputation that he brings in as somebody that plays very physical and gets a lot of penalties called against him. And the New Orleans Saints defense is willing to live and die by that because he also forces turnovers, forces incompletions, gets pass breakups, knocks the ball away, all those other things. He had 3 pass breakups and an interception in addition to those 3 defensive pass interference penalties. So we're going to tell the story. Let's tell the whole story in this situation, right? Editorially. But it's clear that the Atlanta Falcons kind of targeted, right? I think that's fair to say, Paul Adebo a little bit, knowing that that is a place where officials will throw flags, is when number 29 is a part of a play. And that there are often times where Paul Adebo will start off and will play a little bit too physical, a little bit too aggressive, and then has to be able to tone down, which is a little bit challenging to do sometimes. So the Falcons took advantage of that. And the one time that they got the penalty at the right point where there wasn't also a catch, that they could accept the penalty, all those other things, was in that moment that led to what was Younghoe Koo's longest field goal of his career and the longest field goal ever kicked in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which is a relatively young stadium, if we're being real, in order to win that game. But really, the big thing that all comes down to is the Saints defense making one mistake, and then that ended up being the difference in the game. The defense itself as a whole throughout that drive only gave up like 5 yards in terms of what they actually did. But 30 yards on that pass interference penalty is all that it took to kind of put a nail in the coffin, despite the Saints offense getting that late lead. So regardless of how we look at it and who you place the blame on, because again, we have to keep in consideration here that there have also been circumstances and situations in which the New Orleans Saints offense has gotten the ball back late and has not been able to go out there and get that touchdown, get that late drive, all those other things. We saw that against Philadelphia. And look, there's context in that too, right? Offensive line was injured. You lost Eric McCoy. I get it. Again, this isn't about blame. This is about the conversation around the fact that regardless of who steps up to do it, regardless of which side of the ball gets it done, regardless of who catches the ball, who blocks for the person throwing the football, who throws the football, who the football is being thrown at, who's being targeted on the defensive side, who's rushing the passer, regardless of all those little individual details, the New Orleans Saints as a team need to figure out what it is that they need to do in order to be able to close out games when they take a late lead. That's got to be the biggest piece for this team, or when they can hold a late lead going into those last 2.5 to 1 minutes of a game. That's just the bottom line, right? It's not really about whose fault is it, who should we point the finger at, all these other things. It's the New Orleans Saints as a whole that have to get this figured out. And we saw that from Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen spoke to the media on Monday in his day after press conference, and one of the top things that he talked about was needing to close out games and needing to not spot opponents 14 points, which both of those things are absolutely true. The New Orleans Saints became only the 3rd team in NFL history, according to our good friend Drew Porsche, who is a phenomenal stats and analytics expert. They became the 3rd team in NFL history to score 24 points, not allow an offensive touchdown, and still lose a game. And actually, the Saints are on that list twice. There's a very old version of the New Orleans Saints, and then it's a very new version of the New Orleans Saints that have made that list twice. But the Saints are on that list twice. And this variety of the New Orleans Saints are on that list because of 2 reasons. Spotting the opposing team, 14 points, 7 on special teams, 7 by your offense on a fluke pick 6, and then the 30-yard pass interference penalty, right? So I guess it's 3 things technically. And it's all 3 phases is the really challenging part. So self-inflicted wounds, all those other things that we talked about yesterday, yes, all of that is true. But if the New Orleans Saints want to change the narrative of their season, they've got to be able to close out late games, especially late games in which they hold leads. The other thing that they need to take advantage of is the solid quarterback play that they're getting. Yeah, we got some Derek Carr love coming up next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Gametime, the best place to go whether you're buying your tickets to your favorite events, sporting events, concerts, music, theater, whatever it is that you're looking for. Whether you're buying those tickets months in advance or moments in advance, I highly recommend checking out Gametime. If you're somebody that's planning on traveling for the Monday night game for the New Orleans Saints going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, maybe you're going to be looking for something to do Sunday night. Maybe you're looking for something to do during the day on Monday. Well, check out Gametime and see what's going on. Maybe you're coming to New Orleans. You want to pick up tickets for a New Orleans Saints game? Gametime's a great place to do it. Or you want to check out some of the other events going on around the city, around the Saints game, which you might already have tickets to. Gametime is right there for you. Just download the app and you'll be able to check out everything going on in whatever city that you're in. Toggle on all-in pricing so you're not taken by surprise by any last-second fees like some of those other apps, and much more. So go and check them out today. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today to get your tickets. What time is it? Game time. All right, family. If you're somebody that's been upset with Derek Carr and New Orleans Saints quarterback play, I have some information for you that might change your mind, might not change your mind. It's okay. None of my business. But I will say this. I don't think that the New Orleans Saints' big issue has anything to do with quarterback play. The first thing that I'll present as why I feel that way is that what we just highlighted in terms of the New Orleans Saints kind of inability as of late to close out games in which they hold a late lead, or let me not say inability, I think that's unfair, but their struggle over the course of the past couple of weeks, right, to close it out. We don't know what it's going to look like moving forward, so I can't say inability because that creates like a future outlook that's just, it's not what I'm here for. But when you look at the last couple of games, obviously they've had trouble doing that. We just highlighted all that. In both of those scenarios that we just highlighted, the Philadelphia Eagles game as well as the Atlanta Falcons game from last week or from yesterday, Derek Carr led go-ahead touchdown drives in both those situations. And in one of them, throwing the touchdown pass, and another connecting with Chris Olave over the middle of the field, despite going backwards a couple of times during that drive due to penalties and other issues and things like that. So I think that the only reason why you were in position late in the game, again, what happened during the game happened, right? So you could always go back and say, well, you don't throw a pick six. Sure, that's true. But at the same time, like, there's a lot of times where you just dirt that screen and then none of it ever happened, right? So there's only so much of the revisionist stuff that we can do. But if we look at the way that the game actually played out, Derek Carr led 2 go-ahead touchdown drives late in the game. And listen, I get it, and I understand. Like, it's so easy to be upset with the quarterback. It's so easy to be upset with the play caller. It's so easy to be upset with the head coach. And there are a lot of people that have just decided that they don't like Derek Carr. And that's everybody's entitled to their own opinion. I'm not here to change minds. I'm just here to present information. And if that information is helpful to you, then great. If it's not helpful to you, then also great. Totally fine. No skin, no, you know what I mean? Like, no skin off my back. But I don't think that the New Orleans Saints' big issue has been quarterback play at all. And there are times, just to kind of like play this as fairly as I can, there are times where last year, you can absolutely say that quarterback play was an issue in certain games, right? Like, I think we can all agree that there are games where even if you love Derek Carr, even if you love your starting quarterback on your team, that you can admit, like, yeah, that wasn't their greatest game, right? Like, any of us should be able to do that. If you can't, then larger conversation to be had. But I think we can all sit with that reality. No matter how much you love Derek Carr, no matter how much you hate Derek Carr, no matter how much you love your team's favorite quarterback. I'm aware that it's not all Saints fans that watch this show, but it's mostly Saints fans that watch the show or listen to the show. And so I would say that there is a reality from last year to where you say, yeah, there's some games where, like, look, it wasn't Derek Carr's greatest game. And in some cases, Derek Carr was not playing up to his standard, up to the Saints standard, and it led to losses for New Orleans. The 2 losses that the Saints have experienced so far this season do not feel like that is the case. Philadelphia Eagles game, your offensive line is hurt. You're not protecting the quarterback. He's under pressure. You look at the screen grab from the interception to Reed Blankenship as you're trying to desperately move that ball downfield when he's got 3 defenders in his face. You look at this Atlanta game, and it really wasn't under pressure a lot. I think it was only 13 dropbacks that he was under pressure. Handled that extremely well. Completed, I think it was 8 of the 10 passes that he attempted in those situations. Scrambled for a little bit more as well. But for the most part, fine. You know what I mean? Like, at the very worst, fine. Like, good quarterback play. And that's what you need in the NFL. You need good, adequate, solid quarterback play. And I think that's what the New Orleans Saints have gotten from Derek Carr so far. There's nothing really that's been egregious when it comes to this game, when it comes to his game that has caused the New Orleans Saints some issues. Just to kind of further drive that point home, because I want to make sure I'm giving you information. I'm not just like shouting opinions at you. Derek Carr's turnover-worthy pass rate, according to Pro Football Focus, is simply 2.6%. That's tied with Brock Purdy. It's just ahead of CJ Stroud. It's better than Baker Mayfield's. It's better than Trevor Lawrence's. It's better than Matthew Stafford's. It's better than Dak Prescott's. It's better than Patrick Mahomes, who sits at 14.6 when it comes to those. You look at the big throw percentage across the NFL as well. Derek Carr right now, in terms of the big throws that he has made, sits at number 7 in that percentage with 4.6. Number 1 is Josh Allen, who is at 9.3%. He's been playing out of his mind. These are all quarterbacks that have taken at least 100 snaps as well. So this isn't like fluffed category and everything. We can go to things that are a little bit deeper as well and take a look at things like EPA, which takes on-field production and sort of evaluates it in such a way by translating it to points that a player has helped to contribute to the team, right? Put them in position to get. So even if they don't score those points, you still kind of get a little bit of positive credit for this because you're putting your team in position to score points as opposed to take points away, throwing interceptions, throwing turnover-worthy passes, things like that. Derek Carr, 17.0 is his EPA, plus 17.0. That's 4th best amongst all quarterbacks. Now, he's not in the upper echelon, even though he's number 4 in the NFL when it comes to this statistic, because there's a gap between the top 3 guys and Derek Carr. Jaden Daniels, plus 50.7. I mean, incredible season he's having so far. He's also completing 82.1% of his passes, which is nuts. Josh Allen, 36.7. Brock Purdy, 28.4. So there's a gap between Brock Purdy at 28.4 and Derek Carr at 17. But then there's also a gap between Derek Carr at 17 and Andy Dalton, who's number 5 at 12.1. You see what I'm saying? So like, you can look at all of these things and kind of understand that Derek Carr is not necessarily putting this team in a bad position to make plays or a bad position to win games or anything like that. He's getting the ball out the 6th fastest time in the NFL when it comes to quarterbacks around the league. We mentioned the EPA. His EPA per drop back is high. His play action percentage is one of the highest as well. So being able to take advantage of a fully realized offense in scheme and all these other things, as opposed to being limited by the quarterback, even the mental capacity part of it is up there. When it comes to completion percentage over expected, he's number 5 in the NFL at plus 4.5%, completing 72% of his passes. You understand what I'm saying? This is not a team that is being led by a quarterback that has been of detriment to New Orleans. So what we're focusing on in this episode is what are the things that the New Orleans Saints need to take advantage of in order to change the narrative of their season, especially with the fact that like no one's going to pick them against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday night. It's just not going to happen. And so if the Saints lose that game and they drop to 2-3, a lot of people are going to say that the season is over, but the Saints don't have the sort of the Saints don't have the quarterback play that's of detriment to them to say that their season is over through 5 games. And I don't know if you're looking for a little bit of optimism, but if you are, I think that's really, really solid optimism to hold on to. The Saints have to get healthy. The Saints defense has to be able to close out late in games. They got to get better against the run. They got to get better in terms of penalties, things like that. Even on the offensive side, pre-snap penalties, those things still an issue for New Orleans. They still got to be able to take advantage of all that. And we're going to get to something here in a moment, too, that they absolutely need, which is another playmaker to kind of step up. But what I will say is that the New Orleans Saints are not being held back by the most important person on the field. And what does that mean? That means that they have an opportunity to win football games. The issue is that they need to turn around and win those football games. So doing so by taking advantage of the good quarterback play that you're getting might be the quickest path to success, at least for the New Orleans Saints on the offensive side, if they can figure out how to close out these close games. Coming up next, I want to dive into exactly what I just mentioned. The New Orleans Saints need another playmaker to step up. They've got 3 very solid options so far. Where will they get a 4th? Let's break that down as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, where right now you can start your season with a big return. And let's take a look at where they have the New Orleans Saints. I told you nobody's going to be picking the New Orleans Saints this week. 5.5-point underdog, the New Orleans Saints on the road against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I will say this, when it comes to the New Orleans Saints, they tend to win big or lose close. So 5.5 points might be worth your time. I don't know, put $10 down, win a little bit over $8 on the plus or the minus 115 odds on that. I don't know, depending on how you feel with it. But there's that. There's so much more as well. College football. There's all the other NBA, NFL games, there's WNBA playoffs, and much more that you can get in on all across FanDuel. Right now is a great time to do it as well, especially if you are a new customer, because you're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Don't forget, it's not only placing bets, but they've also got play-by-play. They've got latest stats and everything as well, constantly updating in the same page where you place your bets. So go and check them out today at FanDuel.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Last thing I want to take a look at here today is the fact that the New Orleans Saints simply must find another playmaker to contribute to their offense. They've got 4 pretty solid options, but a lot of them are dealing with injuries, and the Saints are going to need somebody else to contribute, to step up. Where can they find that player within the building? Where could they potentially find that player outside the building? There's a lot for us to look at. So let's break it all down. Look, here's the deal, right? The New Orleans Saints, and just to make this very clear, when I talk about playmakers, I'm sticking with non-QB skill position players, right? The guys that are getting the football. We just broke down Derek Carr's contributions. In my opinion, although he might be aided by the success of the first 2 weeks, we'll see how things continue to pan out as they move forward. But in my opinion, Derek Carr has not been a detriment to this New Orleans Saints team. You can have your opinions about whether or not he has been, good, not good, whatever. He has not been a detriment to this New Orleans Saints team, and that is a good thing. The Saints, though, when it comes to the skill position players, they've got 4 really good options. Running back Alvin Kamara and in my opinion, wide receiver Chris Olave top that list in terms of the guys that have been, greatest contributors on a most consistent basis and things like that. Next on the list for me is Taysom Hill, who hasn't contributed on the greatest consistency, but I don't necessarily think that that's all Taysom Hill's fault, right? Like sometimes that comes down to how quickly the Saints are kind of willing to go away from that over the course of the past couple of years. We haven't seen that as much this year, which is good news, but all 3 of the guys that I just mentioned at the top of the list there are all dealing with some pretty substantial health issues, right? You've got Taysom Hill, who came off of a bruised lung to then leave with an abdomen injury, ribs of some kind. Alvin Kamara, who just played with, I saw somewhere a hip pointer, but then also broken ribs. He told us in the locker room. And then you've got Chris Olave, who fought through a hamstring injury like crazy to put up his 3rd straight game of over 80 receiving yards and almost contributed an additional touchdown had he not been pushed out of bounds. So you've got those 3 guys. And then you have the extra guy, of course, as well in Rashid Shaheed, who we did it. We talked about it yesterday. All right, we did it. We already did it. We're not doing the whole shouldn't have fielded the punt thing. We talked about it already. It's done. I'm talking offense. Rashid Shaheed, again, contributing more than 80 receiving yards in this game as well, seeing double-digit targets, all that. The Saints have effectively 2 receivers, is what it feels like, two pass catchers. Then they have a running back that can contribute in a bunch of different ways, and then Taysom Hill, who can contribute in a bunch of different ways, but let's be real, right? Has mostly contributed as a rusher and a blocker so far this season. The Saints don't have what feels like a consistent enough 3rd receiving option that's not their running back, right? I don't want to rule Alvin Kamara out of his ability to be able to contribute as a receiver. We know he can contribute as a pass catcher, but is he going to be able to contribute as consistently as somebody that's actually playing the wide receiver position? Inherently, the answer to that question is no. Now, the Saints do play a lot of 2 wide receiver sets, but they've still played mostly 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers so far this season in terms of an individual personnel group. They do come out with more or with fewer 2-3 wide receiver sets than they do 2 or 1 wide receiver sets. But a part of me wonders how much that is simply because they've got Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, and then they're not necessarily sure what they have in terms of contributing factors behind that at the position. It's a curious thing. Wide receiver A.T. Perry, who we talked about, him being inactive so far this season. The confusion around why hasn't A.T. Perry been on the field comes down a lot to what's his role in this new offense, right? It's a new offensive coordinator. It's a new wide receiver coach. It's a new offensive system that becomes a part of that. You have to figure out now where you fit, because it's not the same place. Like where A.T. Perry fits in this offense in 2024 is not the same place that he made waves in 2023 at the end of the season. That's just the unfortunate truth. And so he's playing it very positively. He's putting good vibes out there, but he wants to figure out what he has to do to get out on the field with his teammates. And maybe it's time for him to just simply be out on the field with his teammates. And that's a decision that the New Orleans Saints simply need to make, because they lack a third wide receiver option at the moment. Rookie Bub Means shows a lot of promise, but isn't being given a lot of snaps. Rookie Mason Tipton showed a lot of promise, but doesn't get a lot of snaps outside of his, they love having him on the field when they're trying to run the football. And this is a little bit of what's also causing the New Orleans Saints a little bit of grief too, is that they've kind of mitigated these players to what feels like, at least early on in the season. And we saw this last year with guys like Lynn Bowden and Keith Kirkwood too, to where you kind of get relegated to playing a role as a blocker. And we don't just see that at wide receiver. We're seeing that at tight end as well. A guy like Foster Moreau, who started the season off pretty strong, if you remember correctly, has played 180 snaps so far this season for New Orleans. And 138 of those, 76.7% of those snaps, have been in blocking situations, only 24 of them being pass blocking situations, over 110 at 114 being run blocking. So it's becoming a tell, first of all, in terms of if Foster Moreau is on the field, it's very likely a run play. But also, this is a guy that you wanted to be able to see contribute more as a pass catcher this season than just being a blocker. And he has undeniably the talent to do exactly that. And you saw it as they opened the season. 4 targets, 4 catches, 43 yards, and a receiving touchdown. You also saw, I think it was against Dallas, that there was another touchdown that was thrown his way, but it ended up getting wiped out by a penalty. These are options for the New Orleans Saints in terms of guys that are on their roster. And it's really going the opposite direction for Juwan Johnson. 125 total snaps so far this season. The majority of those, or just over half of those, have been at, or just under half of those, have been him running routes and him actually being a part of the progression and the passing game and all these other things. And I understand that offensive line injuries kind of outweigh some of that sometimes, or force that sometimes, because you need your tight ends to kind of stay in and help block both in the passing game and in the run game. I'm not being ignorant to that. I'm aware of that. But these are other options that the New Orleans Saints haven't really gotten super involved yet that could help them find that additional playmaker on that offense, that additional option on that offense. I think that's got to be a big thing that the New Orleans Saints are looking at as they look to what are the things that they need to do to take advantage of the talent that they have to be able to kind of right the ship before it sinks. And there's still time to right the ship before it sinks. They just kind of have to get this figured out sooner rather than later. So between A.T. Perry, Bub Means, Cedric Wilson Jr., Mason Tipton, Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, Dallin Holker, if you want, all of those guys, like somebody from that group has to, be given the greater opportunity to be able to step up as a playmaker, right? Not just as a blocker, but as a playmaker. And then they also have to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. Outside of the building, your options are limited. I know a lot of people have talked about Hunter Renfrow, certainly an option. Don't know if he's a playmaker for you right now. And I don't know that he's a better option than what you already have on the roster either, but maybe. And then otherwise, you're looking at some big trade that we just know is not in the New Orleans Saints DNA. So we'll see as the trade deadline gets closer, but it just seems unlikely that that's the route that they'll go. So right now, what they need is somebody from within the building to step up. And the good news around that is that the players have the talent to get that done. The Saints just have to figure out where they fit most effectively. And that's part of a brand new offensive system taking time to settle in. The Saints kind of took off really quickly with that new offensive system in a good way. But now when you're trying to figure out where your 4th, 5th, 6th options are, that's stuff that takes some time. So we'll see if the New Orleans Saints now can get that taken care of sooner rather than later, especially with all the injuries to the top 3 guys that have been their key contributors thus far. So if the Saints can take advantage of that, take advantage of the at the worst adequate quarterback play that they're getting, and close out games where they have late leads, we're talking about a very different New Orleans Saints season by the time that it's all said and done. And there's still time to get to that portion of the year. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen of the day, every day for your second listen. Go check out Locked On NFL, 2 shows a day, giving you all the stories you need from around the National Football League. And of course, you can go and check out Locked On Pelicans. Jake Madison over at Media Day, interviews with some of the biggest names from the New Orleans Pelicans organization. Make sure you're going and checking him out every Monday through Friday as well over at Locked On Pelicans. Appreciate you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.